Welcome to Jolineknitsalot. This is my show about knitting and crafting and the things I get up to here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. If you've watched my show before, you know I'm a big fan of Summerlee sock designs, and I've knit quite a number of them. I really enjoyed her Colorwork Cuff Club, which came out in August of 2024 and ran until July of 2025. In fact, I knit all the patterns. I really enjoy knitting Colorwork socks, it turns out. But at first I did find them quite intimidating. I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you how I knit my Colorwork socks, in the off chance that it might help you discover the joy of knitting Colorwork socks. Knitting Colorwork in the round can be a little tricky. I'll talk to you about the tools I use, some techniques on how to keep your Colorwork even, and then a couple of techniques to catch or manage your yarn in the back if you have long floats. So if you're game, let's jump in and knit some Colorwork socks. I'm working on the first pattern in the volume 2 of Summerlee's Cuff Club. This is the August 2025 pattern, and I've already finished the first sock. You can see I have it here on a blocker. I tend to block my socks after I've finished them to even out the color work, but then after I wear them and wash them, I don't tend to block them after that. Blocking does help even out some of this color work, and so that's why it does pay to do it after you finish your socks. Let me just show you the inside of this sock that I've been working on, so we get a better idea of what stranded color work looks like on the inside and the outside. So here you can see I'm making stitches with the main color as well as a contrast color. I have a few rounds here, actually 2, where I'm using 3 colors at a time. I'll show you how I do that. And if I flip my sock inside out, you can see the strands that stranded color work is named after. So when we're not using a color to make stitches, it's being held in the back of our work. And it just floats along the back in these strands or floats. And it's important to keep these strands nice and loose. When color work is done too tightly, these strands don't allow your fabric to stretch. And when that happens on the front side of your work, it can pucker. And if your strands are too tight, there really is no blocking that out. So it's important, one of the best things you can do or think about while you're knitting stranded color work is just to relax and keep your strands nice and loose. There are a couple of ways or techniques, I guess, that can help you to keep your strands loose. I'll just flip this to the right side. There's 2 things you can do just right off the top that will help you keep your strands loose. One of those is going to be to go up a needle size. If you go up a needle size, automatically you're going to be using more yarn. Your stitches will be a little bit bigger and your strands will be looser. So when you take them off the needle, they can relax and be a little looser. The other thing you can do is take your knitting. So if you imagine this is my knitting and I'm working color work, you want to flip your knitting inside out so the strands are being forced on the outside of your work. This is the same idea as if you're running a race on a track. If you're on the inside of the track, your lane is going to be shorter than if you're on the outside of the track. And so if we make our floats go around the outside of our knitting, that forces those strands to be a little bit longer. So what that looks like is taking your knitting, flipping it inside out like this. So now the right side of your knitting is on the inside and the wrong side of your knitting is on the outside. You're still going to be knitting and looking at the right side of your knitting like this. So you would still knit across these stitches so you can see the V's in this manner. But the strands of your color work will be forced to go on the outside, and that can lengthen them a little bit. Just for ease of showing you how to do color work, I'm going to flip this inside out. But that's something you can think about as a technique just to help you keep your knitting a little looser. I'm going to go up a needle size. I like to knit my socks on DPNs. It's how I learned, and it is sort of my go-to technique I always come back to. You can knit your socks on in any way that feels good to you. You can use magic loop, you can use two circs, like two shorter circs. You can do it however you like, but I do find that for me, when I'm knitting the socks, normally I like to use DPNs, but when I do color work, I have learned that I like a 9-inch circular needle for a couple of reasons. A 9-inch circular needle allows me to just get into a flow with the color work, so I don't have to stop and change needles or rearrange my stitches on a cable or what have you. With a 9-inch circular, I can just go round and round. It did take a little bit of learning, I'm not going to lie. It wasn't super comfortable at the get-go, but I have found that it is helpful. It also helps me keep my strands even. So because I don't have any places where my needles join, where if you're normally knitting socks, you may get a ladder, that's where you may get a little bit of distortion also in the strands behind your work. So using a 9-inch circular needle allows me to just get in a flow and to not have any trouble spots where I might get a ladder or I might get my strands not being pulled long enough. All right, I'm ready to start my chart, which, lucky for me, starts with a couple of plain rounds of stockinette. And I'm going to switch from my regular sock needles, which are DPNs in the 2.25 millimeter size, and I'm going to go up one size to 2.5 millimeter needles, and I'm going to use this 9-inch circular. I've discovered I really like these twist. They're from Chalgu, and they have two lengths of tips. So you can either have 2-inch tips or you can have 3-inch tips. I choose to have 1, 2, and 1, 3. This allows me to do the color work on the right hand needle, which is a little bit longer, and it still keeps the circumference short enough to work a sock. So I'm going to go ahead and just transfer or knit on the first round of the chart that I'm knitting. And I'm going to be using my 9-inch circular needles. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit those on. I do hold my yarn in my right hand regularly. That's just how I knit. But when I knit my color work, I knit with one color in one hand and one color in the other hand. And actually, occasionally, I do 2 colors in the left hand. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I get there. For right now, I'm just going to work my way around, knitting across each DPN, and then continuing until I have all my stitches on my 9-inch circular needle. As you can see, I've got all my stitches on my 9-inch circular now, and I've got a stitch marker showing me where my round starts. I'm ready to start working with 2 colors now, and I like to use both my hands when I'm knitting color work, stranded color work. So I keep my main color in my right hand, and I put my contrast color or the color making the designs in my left hand. This is based on a theory of color dominance. I know not everybody subscribes to this theory, but I do find that just holding my yarns in this way makes for the best results in terms of my color work knitting. The theory is that if you hold your yarn, your contrast color in your left hand, that left hand yarn tends to run underneath the right hand yarn. So if my yarns are like this, in the back of my knitting, running like this, and I need to make some stitches with my contrast color, it has farther to go to get up and over the needle. So if this yarn has to go up and over the needle to make a stitch like that, and make a little loop, it's going to use a little bit more yarn than my main color, and it's going to therefore be a slightly larger stitch. And that is not measurable, but it does allow those stitches to pop out a little bit. And if I just show you on the sock that I've made, I think we can agree that these purple stitches don't necessarily look a lot larger, but they do stand out against the paler color background, and that's really all I'm looking for. So let me just get set up. I'm going to move my contrast color over to my left side, and I'm going to keep my main color yarn on my right side. I'm going to tuck the tail of the yarn that I'm adding in just down into the sock. I will weave that in later. There are lots of opportunities in stranded color work for weaving in your ends. You just have to loop it around any of those strands that I showed you on the back side. It doesn't have to be super neat because you've got a lot of opportunities to secure that yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and hold my contrast color in my left hand. My left hand isn't very smart. It's not as smart as my right hand. So it's not very fancy in how it holds the yarn. For some reason, my right hand is much fancier and likes to tension the yarn in a more complicated way. But my left hand just holds it over, and that's okay. It's, I think, a matter of finding what's comfortable for you and whatever works. So now I'm going to start working the chart. I'm not going to show you the chart because it's a paid for pattern, but I will just show you how I get started. So I've got a couple stitches in the main color, and now I'm going to add in my contrast color stitches. So I just go ahead and hold the yarn in my left hand and make the stitches I need to make. Now the right hand stitches are going to come around in the back, and this is going to create a strand. Now if you imagine if I pulled this super tight, you could see how my fabric would bunch up. So I want to keep that nice and loose. I'm not going to pull this strand tight. And another thing that you can do to keep those strands from getting too tight is keep moving your stitches along your right hand needle. Keep that space nice and open so that your strands can be loose. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a few stitches with my main color. And now it's time for some stitches with my contrast color. Again, I'm going to try and keep that nice and loose. I'm going to move my stitches around the right hand side of this needle so that that strand is nice and loose. And I'm just going to go ahead and knit my stitches. And I'm going to keep doing this in this way for the whole chart. In a couple rounds, I'm going to have to be a little more careful because I have two contrast color yarns. And when I get there, I will show you how I manage those two. But in the meantime, I'm just going to keep working my way around. And I think that maybe this illustrates how nice it is to be on a 9-inch circular because I'm not having to stop and readjust my needles at all. And my stitches can keep moving just around and around without much fuss. I've come to the point in the chart where I need to add in my third color, and thankfully I only need to use 3 colors on 2 rounds of this chart. Of course I have to repeat those 2 yarns in a little bit, but I'll get to that when I get there. This time I'm just going to again add the tail into the bottom of my sock, and I will weave that in later when I get there. And now I'm just going to carry both of these contrast colors over my first finger in my left hand. It helps if they can be separated a little bit. It makes it easier to pick up the yarn, but that's not the end of the world if they're close together. And so now when I need to use this color, I will pick up that stitch. I'll knit a stitch from my main color. And now I need some of this purple color. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick that strand from my left finger. It's not pretty, it's not necessarily very, I'm not as quick and as elegant as I am when I'm using only 2 colors at a time. But this is how I knit my rows of color work, rounds of color work with 3 colors. And I'm just going to work my way slowly around. Again, if you only have 2 colors, it is a little bit faster and more efficient maybe. There are some tools that you can use to keep, my goodness, now I'm tangled up, to keep these yarns separated on your left hand needle or your left hand finger. You can use, there's little rings with loops in them that will keep multiple strands of different colors separate. So as you can see, I'm just slowly working my way around, choosing the color I need to make a stitch with from my left hand and trying to keep my stitches spread out along my right hand needle. If we look at my floats in the back, you can see them pretty loose. When I block them, those will sort of even out a little bit and lay nicer and closer to the back of my work. But again, looser floats like this is better in terms of color work knitting than if they were too tight. So I have one last thing that I wanted to show you that might come in handy if you're ever knitting color work that has long stretches in between stitches that are being knit. So if for some reason your strands in the back are becoming quite long, or you're having to knit more than about an inch's worth of stitches in between using, let's say, your contrast color yarn, you may want to do a catch in the back, and I'm going to show you now what that looks like. So right now I have 7 stitches of my main color and just 1 of my contrast color. So I'm going to go ahead and do that 1 contrast color stitch, and now there's going to be 7 of my main color, and that is quite a long way to carry your strand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a catch. If you're having to do this on more than 1 round in a row, I suggest moving where you do your catch around. So this time I'm going to, let's say, knit 3 and then do a catch. But on the next round that I do, I might knit 5 and then do a catch. And that just makes sure that these are spread out around your work. If you have, for some reason, a lot of them stacked up one on each other, they become a little bit more noticeable from the front of your work. So I suggest moving them around a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to knit, I said 3, I think, right? I'm going to knit 3 stitches. And now I want to catch my yarn that's in my left hand. What this does is it kind of sandwiches it to the back of my work so that that strand isn't just floating in midair. It's sort of caught right here. And I'll show you what that looks like. First, I'm going to go into the stitch the way I normally would. I lay my left hand yarn over top of my needle, and then I go to make a stitch the way I normally would. And then I lift that left hand yarn out of the way and I pull my needle through. Then I'm going to knit 1 more stitch. And when I do that, if we look at the back of my work, I think you can see that that green yarn is caught right there. So now instead of being a big long float like maybe this one is, you can see that one, it's caught up next to the fabric. If we look on the right side, if I pull it, that green yarn does disappear, but you could see how maybe over time, if you had a bunch of them stacked up, it would be noticeable, and that's why we're going to move them around. Now I'm just going to keep knitting with my main color yarn until I need to make a green stitch. Here it is. And I'll knit 3 again. And I'll do a catch. And you might notice me, again, stretching out the stitches on my right hand needle. That's really helpful in keeping your knitting nice and stretched and even. So again, I go into the stitch the way I normally would. I lay the left hand yarn over top. I wrap my yarn like I'm going to make a stitch, and then I lift that green one out of the way and pull my stitch through. And what really finishes off this catch is knitting the next stitch, because that's what makes it sort of sandwiched in between here and here. And I'm just going to keep doing that all the way around. Now, you might think to yourself, here, I'll show you this one more time, and then we'll discuss. So I've knit 3, I go into the stitch the way I normally would, I lay that green yarn or my contrast yarn over top, I wrap my yarn the way I normally would, and then I lift the left one out of the way and pull it through. I knit 1 more stitch, and then that yarn is caught. So you may be thinking to yourself, but what if you have to catch the yarn in your right hand? Because that can happen too. So just for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and switch my yarns. So I've now got my contrast over here and my main color in my left hand, because I want to show you how you might catch the yarn in your left hand. So now I'm going to do the same thing I was doing before. I'm going to knit 3 stitches with my main color yarn. And now I want to do a catch. So I'm going to enter the stitch the way I normally do, that none of that changes. When I'm trying to catch my right hand yarn, I wrap it around like I'm going to make a stitch. Then I catch my yarn with my left hand that is in my left hand by going over it. And then I pull my right hand or unwrap my right hand yarn out of the way and pull my stitch through. Then I knit one more. And again, that is what's going to sort of sandwich that yarn in there. I'm going to show you that one again because I feel like the catch on the right hand side is a little bit more complicated than the other one. Okay, let's try it again. I'm going to enter the stitch the way I normally do. I take my right hand yarn and I wrap it as if I'm going to make a stitch. Then I take my left hand yarn and it comes from, you can think of this in two ways. Your needle either goes over the top of the yarn and comes under it, or your yarn goes from the bottom and up and around. It's the same movement, but some people think of it one way and some people think of it another way. Now, before I pull that stitch through, I'm going to unwrap my right hand yarn and get it out of the way and pull my stitch through. I knit once more, and now my yarn is caught. And through the magic of YouTube, I'm going to show you that one more time. So we're going to knit 3 stitches. I go into the next stitch the way I normally would. I wrap my right hand yarn around. I go to create a stitch with my left hand yarn, and before I pull my stitch through, I unwrap the right hand yarn and I make a stitch. And then I knit once more, and that's what really catches that yarn. Now I'm going to go back to my regularly scheduled knitting, which means my contrast yarn is on my left, my main color is on my right, and I'm going to complete my socks. That is how I knit my Colorwork socks. I know there was kind of a few different techniques that you may not have seen before tucked into this little video. I hope you find it useful, and I hope that you give Colorwork socks a try. I know the first time I tried knitting socks with stranded Colorwork, they were a hot mess. My strands were too tight. There's no way that that sock would have gotten on anyone's foot. And I just sort of gave up the idea of doing Colorwork for quite some time. But I think with experience and with a little bit of courage, I got back into knitting Colorwork on a smaller circumference, and I really do enjoy it now. So I hope you'll give it a try, and I hope I'll see you back on my channel. And there you have it. That's how I knit my Colorwork socks. I hope you found this video interesting or helpful, and if you have, please feel free to like and subscribe to my channel, where you'll find videos of all the things that I'm working on, be it knitting, crochet, stitching, a little bit of baking. I'm a beginner spinner, so please feel free to join me for my next episode. I hope that in the next little while you find time to do all the things that you like to do. I know I plan on knitting a lot. I'll see you soon.